Tonight, new information about a notorious baby killer who we've reported on for 3 decades now. Mary Beth Tinning has been paroled.
Prisons are built to control danger, but what happens when the danger can't be contained? Behind steel bars and locked doors live women whose crimes are so chilling, even hardened criminals whisper their names. They've turned jealousy into bloodshed, love into slaying, and trust into terror. Some were manipulated with charm, others struck with raw violence, but all left scars that never faded. One began her reign of terror as a teenager, and her story still unsettles guards today. Who is the most feared woman in a U.S. prison? Number 15. Gypsy Rose Blanchard. For years, the quiet community of Springfield, Missouri, believed Gypsy Rose Blanchard was a fragile girl battling impossible odds. She was seen in a wheelchair, her thin frame and large glasses painting the picture of a child stricken with leukemia, muscular dystrophy, and countless other illnesses. Her mother, Dee Blanchard, reinforced the story at every turn. She played the role of tireless caretaker, attending charity events, securing donations, and even receiving a house from Habitat for Humanity. To neighbors and friends, she was an angel of sacrifice. But behind the carefully staged image lurked a nightmare. Gypsy wasn't sick at all. She was the victim of Munchausen syndrome by proxy, a condition where a caregiver fabricates or induces illness in someone under their care. Dee subjected her daughter to invasive medical procedures, unnecessary medications, and strict control over every part of her life. Gypsy was kept infantilized, dependent, and convinced she was helpless without her mother's guidance. By the late teen years, the cracks in the web of lies began to show to Gypsy. She held secret online communications, meeting Nicholas Godejohn, who was both her confidant and her accomplice. Together, they hatched a desperate plan to free Gypsy from Dee. On June 9th, 2015, Nicholas entered the Blanchard home and stabbed Dee to death, while Gypsy stayed hidden in another room. The events shocked the nation and unraveled years of deception. Gypsy's trial blurred the line between victim and criminal. In 2016, she pleaded guilty to second-degree slaying and was sentenced to 10 years. She was paroled on December 28, 2023. Her case remains a haunting testament that sometimes the most tragic stories come not from predators, but from survivors pushed too far. If that made you uneasy, brace yourself. The next chapter is even darker. Number 14. Pamela Smart. In May 1990, the quiet town of Derry, New Hampshire, was shaken by the shocking slaying of 24-year-old Gregory Smart in his own home. At first, investigators thought they were looking at a burglary gone wrong. But as the details emerged, the truth proved far darker. The crime had been orchestrated not by strangers, but by Gregory's own wife, 22-year-old Pamela Smart. Pamela worked as a high school media coordinator, where she met 15-year-old Billy Flynn. What began as a mentorship quickly turned into an illicit affair. Pamela, older and in a position of authority, promised Flynn love, a shared future, and a life without restrictions. But her marriage stood in the way. To resolve it, Pamela manipulated Flynn into believing that the only path forward was to slay her husband. On the first day of May in the year 1990, Flynn and a colleague entered the Smart house while Pamela was conveniently far away. They ambushed Gregory, shooting him in the head.
I pulled the trigger. God forgive me.
And leaving him for dead in his living room. No one was fooled by the staged burglary for very long. The investigation garnished itself with national media pigeons and all too eagerly washed Pamela's dirty linen in public. Wiretaps caught her detailing the slaying plot with no hint of remorse, while witnesses provided testimony regarding her control over Flynn and his friends. Prosecutors allege she coldly exploited impressionable teenagers for her own gains. In 1991, she was convicted as an accomplice to first-degree slaying, conspiracy to slaying, and witness tampering and sentenced to life in prison without parole. Now, more than 3 decades later, she still holds the title of representing how manipulation, lust, and power can turn into one fatal betrayal. Number 13. Christa Gail Pike. A steel door slams shut, and silence spreads across the tier. That's the kind of presence Christa Gail Pike commands even from segregation. In 1995, inside the Knoxville Job Corps program, 18-year-old Pike lured 19-year-old Colleen Slemmer to a remote corner of campus under the pretense of making peace. What happened next was not a fight, but a calculated display of cruelty. Over the course of 30 minutes, Pike and her accomplices tortured Slemmer, beating her, carving a pentagram into her flesh, and ultimately slaying her. The most disturbing detail came afterward. Pike kept a piece of Slemmer's skull as a trophy, later bragging about it. That one act transformed a brutal slaying into a national horror story. Still, most of Pike's notoriety is related to her life inside prison.
And I thought that if I went in there and told him that I did every single thing that happened up there...
Not the crime itself. Reportedly, she is merciless, crazy, and uncontrollable. Officers have seized homemade weapons and intercepted violent plots and documented assaults that have forced corrections to come up with what they now call maximum security on steroids. She needs special handling, with multiple escorts and increased restrictions, yet she wreaks havoc by getting contraband items, writing coded notes, and having alliances with other inmates. Pike proved herself dangerous yet again in 2004 when authorities uncovered a plan she had contrived with another inmate to slay a fellow prisoner. The original trial has been appealed over and over again, but the courts consistently turn back to Pike's ongoing violence as the justification for her death sentence. Pike, barely 18 at her crime, is still the youngest female death row inmate in Tennessee and the only woman on the executioner's row of the state figure that even hard-edged officers stiffen their grip on the keys for. Number 12. Diane Downs. A blood-soaked car screeched to a halt at Mackenzie Willamette Hospital in Springfield, Oregon, on a spring night in 1983. Inside were 3 children, Cheryl, age 7, Christy, age 8, and Stephen, just 3 years old, all clinging to life from devastating gunshot wounds. Behind the wheel was their mother, Diane Downs. Calm, almost detached, she delivered a story of horror. A shaggy-haired stranger had flagged her down on a deserted road, demanded her car, and opened fire when she resisted. At first, the public saw her as a frantic parent caught in a random act of violence, but the cracks formed almost immediately. Witnesses recalled Downs driving suspiciously slowly toward the ER, not like a desperate mother trying to save her children. Hospital staff noted her eerie composure, her lack of panic while doctors fought to keep the children alive. And then came the voice that destroyed her tale. Christy, the surviving daughter, who had suffered a stroke from her wounds, bravely testified that it was her own mother who pulled the trigger. The motive really chilled the investigators. Downs, an infatuated lover within the chains of marriage, openly made it clear that he didn't want any children with her. It was simply not to be thought of by her. The answer was to take them out completely.
Saying that anybody has to believe me, but I know within myself I can sit here with a clear conscience and know that I did not shoot my kids.
Thus, the conviction in 1984 for slaying, attempted slaying, and assault sentenced Downs to life imprisonment with an additional 50 years. Yet, that threat was not all ended with her conviction. She was free again from prison in 1987 and had to run for 10 days before being caught again with other fugitives. That gall-cleaving act laid an indelible mark on her opprobrious and dangerous man. That symbol of betrayal, even decades later, is Diane Downs, whose mother turned against her very own children, leaving scars that never fade. Number 11. Brenda Delgado. On the evening of September 2, 2015, a single gunshot rang out in the dimly lit parking garage of a Dallas apartment complex. 35-year-old dentist Kendra Hatcher collapsed instantly, executed in what looked like the work of a professional slayer. But the mastermind wasn't a seasoned criminal or cartel operative. It was a woman consumed by jealousy, Brenda Delgado. Delgado had once been romantically involved with dermatologist Ricardo Paniagua. When she learned he had moved on with Kendra, her emotions twisted from heartbreak to rage. Determined to remove the rival she blamed for her rejection, Brenda engineered a chilling slaying-for-hire scheme. She enlisted Crystal Cortez as a driver and Christopher Love as the gunman. Together, they ambushed Kendra in cold blood, slaying her with a single bullet to the head and escaping into the night. It was a case that rocked the city of Dallas, but Delgado's careful planning slipped evidence in its wake. Telephone records, surveillance cameras, and witness statements directed the investigators' search straight in her direction. With the realization of a tightening net, she fled to Mexico, which somehow triggered an international manhunt to capture her and found her name on the FBI's 10 most wanted list. Some months afterward, Mexican authorities caught up with her and thereafter extradited her to the United States. In court, Delgado was characterized by the prosecution as calculating, manipulative,
The jury heard from Brenda Delgado on day number 3 of her capital murder trial.
and dangerously persuasive, a person capable of leading others into violence without gripping the weapon herself. That sort of reputation has certainly gone with her into the prison, where her influence over others gives officials undue caution. Convicted of capital slaying, Delgado was sentenced to life without possibility of parole. Number 10. Susan Smith. On the night of October 25, 1994, the quiet town of Union, South Carolina, was shattered when 23-year-old Susan Smith placed a frantic 911 call. Through sobs, she claimed that a black man had carjacked her car at a red light and sped away with her 2 little boys, 3-year-old Michael and 14-month-old Alexander, still strapped into their car seats. Within hours, her tearful televised appeals gripped the nation.
I want to say to my babies,
For 9 long days, America searched lakes, woods, and highways, clinging to hope that the children might be returned safely. However, the weakness of Susan's narrative soon began to show. Witnesses contradicted her timeline, while investigators noted something peculiar in her composure. Her crying seemed feigned, her affect strangely flat for a mother facing the loss of her sons. The facade came crashing down on November 3rd. Smith admitted there had been no carjacker and that she drove her Mazda to a lake, strapped her sons into their seats, and released the brake while watching the car sink slowly into the water with her children inside. The motive shocked even the seasoned detectives. At the time, Susan was engaged with a man who'd told her outright he didn't want any kids. Rather than walk away, she chose to eliminate her sons as obstacles in her way. The revelation of her racial hoax only intensified the outrage, garnering anger across the country for the manner in which she exploited her children as pawns in her scheme and played on racial fears to cover up her crime. On conviction for 2 counts of slaying, Smith was sentenced to life with eligibility for parole after 30 years, but the parole was denied on November 20, 2024. Within prison walls, she has remained one of the most reviled inmates, behaving manipulatively, selfishly in the eyes of others, and forever doomed by the betrayal of her most sacred duty, motherhood. Number 9. Sheila Eddy. On a warm summer night in July 2012, 16-year-old Skylar Neese quietly slipped out of her West Virginia home, expecting a fun night with her 2 closest friends, Sheila Eddy and Rachel Schaff. For years, the trio had been inseparable, the kind of friendship people assumed was unbreakable. But beneath the smiles and selfies simmered jealousy, resentment, and tension that would soon erupt into violence. By dawn, Skylar was gone, betrayed by the very people she trusted most. Eddy and Schaff lured Skylar to a remote wooded area under the guise of a late-night drive. Armed with kitchen knives hidden in their clothing, they struck in a coordinated frenzy. Skylar fought desperately, but the attack was merciless. Stabbed repeatedly, she collapsed, and the girls dragged her body into the brush, leaving her buried under leaves and branches. For them, it was supposed to be a secret that would stay hidden forever. For months, Sheila purported to be a grieving friend. She posted emotional messages on social media, looked broken in public, and even joined in the search efforts for Skylar. Her act seemed to work until Rachel couldn't take the guilt anymore. Finally breaking out into confession, all that came out was horrifying. And what the investigators eventually found was a shocking betrayal. Prosecutors in the court painted an image of Sheila being the central leader, the kind that masterminds everything with a very cold charisma, making one very unsettlingly detached with what she had done. Her lack of remorse just solidifies the individualistic image of a teenager capable of committing violence. She now faces a life term of imprisonment, with the possibility of parole after 15 years, and behind her door, Sheila Eddy remains one of the most terrifying reminders that the jagged edge of betrayal can come from the closest people to us. In the end, the monster didn't hide in the dark, but rather sat beside you, grinning like an acquaintance. Keep your guard up, because the next case proves evil can hide behind the kindest smile. Number 8. Velma Barfield. In the quiet town of Lumberton, North Carolina, few could have imagined that a kindly, church-going grandmother was hiding one of the darkest secrets in the state's history. Velma Barfield, born in 1932, seemed like the picture of Southern gentility, attending church, offering prayers, and presenting herself as a devoted family woman. But beneath that grandmotherly smile was a serial poisoner whose crimes would eventually shock the nation and earn her the chilling nickname, the Death Row Granny. Her victims weren't strangers. They were the people who trusted her most. Over the years, Velma systematically poisoned her own mother, 2 husbands, a fiancé, and even her boyfriend's elderly mother. Her method was deceptively simple, slipping arsenic into food or drinks with patient precision. Each death appeared natural at first: heart failure, sudden illness, tragic misfortune. Neighbors offered sympathy, never suspecting the woman weeping beside the casket had orchestrated it all. The truth emerged in 1978, shortly after her fiancé, Stuart Taylor, died suspiciously. An autopsy found fatal levels of arsenic in his body. That one finding opened up Velma's carefully constructed wall. Investigators pushed out further, connecting the dots toward the life of Taylor and the string of tragedies that seemed to follow Velma wherever she went. In 1978, she was convicted of first-degree slaying. But her infamy wasn't just due to her crimes, but her fate. Velma Barfield ended up being the first modern woman in the United States to be executed through lethal injection. The sentence was executed on November 2, 1984. Still, Velma's tale sends shivers because it is the very antithesis of what it is: an endearing grandmother figure, Bible in hand, hiding the cold calculation of a woman who turned trust and caregiving into weapons of death. Number 7. Mary Beth Tinning. Between 1972 and 1985, the town of Schenectady, New York, was haunted by an almost unimaginable series of tragedies inside one family's home. 9 children died under the care of their mother, Mary Beth Tinning, 8 biological and 1 adopted. Each loss was initially explained away as sudden illness, seizures, or even the mysterious sudden infant death syndrome. At first, doctors and neighbors offered sympathy, believing the family was cursed by unimaginable misfortune. But as the funerals accumulated, suspicion began to replace compassion. The pattern was chilling. Infants who had appeared perfectly healthy would suddenly become unresponsive, rushed to hospitals where efforts to revive them failed. Each time, Mary Beth accepted condolences with a calmness that unsettled those closest to her. Still, no one wanted to believe that a mother could be at the center of so much death. It wasn't until 1985 when her adopted daughter Tammy Lynn, only 5 months old, was found lifeless, that investigators began to confront the impossible truth. The odds of one family losing 9 children to natural causes were essentially non-existent. Investigators were able to confront Mary Beth, who ultimately confessed to smothering little Tammy Lynn, although she only confessed to that one slaying. Nevertheless, the authorities strongly believed the true figure to be much higher. Experts later opined that Mary Beth may have had Munchausen syndrome by proxy, craving the sympathy and attention that would inevitably follow such tragedies. What should have been the safest place, a mother's embrace, became the very instrument of death. In 1987, Mary Beth Tinning was found guilty of second-degree slaying in connection with Tammy Lynn's death, given a sentence of 20 years to life imprisonment, and was paroled in 2018 after more than 3 decades served. From cradle to grave, her story lives on as one of the most terrible betrayals in American crime. Number 6. Aileen Wuornos. In the late 1980s, the highways of Florida became the hunting grounds of Aileen Wuornos, a woman whose name is now etched into true crime history as one of America's most infamous female serial slayers. Born in 1956 in Rochester, Michigan, Wuornos grew up in a storm of neglect and trauma. Abandoned by her mother and raised by abusive grandparents, she endured indecent assault, violence, and poverty before she was even a teenager. By her early teens, she had been cast out of her home and turned to prostitution simply to survive. That path would end one day in a serpentine trail of slaying, where Wuornos would slay at least 7 men, mostly middle-aged clients solicited by her between 1989 and 1990, along highways. These men would be lured into isolated locations, shot point blank, and their belongings would be taken from them on vehicles. Wuornos claimed the slayings were self-defense, insisting that each man attempted to indecently assault her. Prosecutors, however, painted a much darker picture, a predatory monster who robbed and slayed in the name of temporary indecent satisfaction for money, cars, and fleeting moments of control. Her arrest in 1991, thanks to a former friend who taped her, catapulted the case into national attention. The trial would turn into a media circus, and Wuornos, derogatorily called variously as the Damsel of Death, would be hailed as a woman either a frozen slaying machine or molded by lifetime abuse. 6 slayings carried the death sentence for her. On October 9, 2002, Wuornos died by lethal injection at the Florida State Prison. Her last words, both cryptic and defiant, reflected a life full of chaos. A part victim, one part villain, and forever one of the most haunting figures in modern American crime. Number 5. Kristen Gilbert. At the Veterans Affairs Medical Center in Northampton, Massachusetts, the halls carried a sinister pattern during the 1990s. Stable patients would suddenly crash into cardiac arrest, and the death toll seemed to spike whenever one nurse was on duty. Kristen Gilbert. To her co-workers, Gilbert came across as competent, personable, and even charming. But behind the mask of professionalism was a manipulative predator who orchestrated medical emergencies to satisfy her own twisted needs. Born in 1967, Gilbert's background carried signs of instability. Friends and family recalled a tendency to lie, exaggerate illnesses, and create drama to keep attention fixed on her. Nursing gave her both access and opportunity. Armed with syringes of epinephrine, a substance that overstimulates the heart, she would inject patients, triggering sudden cardiac arrests. When alarms sounded, Gilbert often positioned herself as the first to respond, playing the role of heroic savior. But for many victims, her help came far too late.
Kristen Gilbert was a nurse at the Veterans Affairs Medical Center, VAMC, in Northampton, Massachusetts.
Gradually, investigators began to see the chilling pattern. The mortality rates during Gilbert's shifts were much higher than during her absences. The witnesses testified to her being at the scene when some of the unexplained deaths took place, and have also reported strange behaviors on her part. Everything from self-harm threats to calling in bomb threats. It was all signs for the prosecutors of a woman too desperate for control to stir trouble to be at the heart of it. In 2001, Gilbert was convicted of 3 counts of first-degree slaying, a second-degree slaying conviction, and several attempted slaying convictions. All were served consecutively, giving her life in prison with no chance for parole. Today, she is probably one of the most disturbing reminders of betrayal in the medical field. A nurse who decided to play God with the lives of veterans she was sworn to protect, transforming trust into terror. Number 4. Susan Atkins. In the late 1960s, America recoiled at the shocking violence carried out by Charles Manson and his cult-like family. Among his most loyal followers was Susan Atkins, a young woman whose devotion to Manson transformed her into one of the most feared slayers of the era. Born in 1948 in California, Atkins's early life was defined by instability. She grew up in a fractured home marked by neglect, alcoholism, and abandonment. Searching for belonging, she fell under the sway of Manson's manipulative charisma, embracing his twisted vision of love, freedom, and violence. What began as a desperate quest for purpose ended with her participation in some of the most infamous crimes in American history. On August 9, 1969, Atkins, along with the Manson family members, went to the Los Angeles home of actress Sharon Tate.
Susan Atkins was a member of the Manson family, convicted in the 1969 murders of actress Sharon Tate and 4 others.
Tate was expecting a baby and begged for her life, but this didn't deter Atkins at all. She boasted later on that she had stabbed Tate various times, saying rather coldly, "I don't even know how many times I stabbed her." The night after that, along with others, they slayed Leno and Rosemary LaBianca in equally savage ways. Her impact testimony in the courtroom was extremely shocking. With an eerie tone in her voice, Atkins talked about the slayings without a hint of remorse as she shared the descriptions of the terror she helped to unleash. Originally sentenced to death, Atkins's punishment was later reduced to life imprisonment during the period when California suspended capital punishment. Inside prison walls, Atkins's reputation still held strong. She was seen as manipulative, hostile, and unrepentant, well beyond the reign of terror led by the Manson family. In 2009, she succumbed to brain cancer, but she holds a place in history as a sinister siren who stands for all that signifies the manipulation of a vulnerable soul to become an instrument of pure evil. Number 3. Nannie Doss. Behind her warm smile and grandmotherly charm, Nannie Doss concealed one of the most disturbing slaying sprees in American history. Born in 1905 in Blue Mountain, Alabama, she grew up in poverty and endured years of hardship, strict discipline, and abuse. Outwardly, Nannie seemed like a devoted wife and homemaker. In reality, she was a cold-blooded poisoner who treated slaying almost like a hobby, laughing and joking even as she described her crimes. Her unsettling cheerfulness earned her the grim nickname, the Giggling Granny. From the late 1920s through the 1950s, Doss left behind a trail of death that spanned decades and households. She married 5 times, and each husband eventually met an untimely end, usually after ingesting arsenic hidden in food or drink. But her violence wasn't limited to spouses. Nannie also slayed her own mother, her sister, her grandson, and even her mother-in-law. Investigators ultimately linked her to at least 11 deaths, though some suspect the true number could be higher. The meticulously tailored appearance slipped away finally in 1954 after the sudden death of her 5th husband, Samuel Doss. An autopsy revealed the undreamt of lethal, arsenical complexity and the consequent re-examination of the years and top of decades trail of suspicious deaths, which seemed to follow wherever she went. She did not just confess when asked, she confessed her secrets to police officers, giggling and joking, describing the gruesome details vividly, but showing no remorse. She told about her cool calculations and the casual demeanor with which she exhibited to poisoning those around her. an incident which appalled everyone. She was found guilty in 1955 of the slaying of Sam Fraser and sentenced to a life term. Nannie Doss died of leukemia in prison in 1965, but remains to this day as one of the most horrible examples of evil hiding in front of everyone, the image of a grandmotherly person whose laughter masked in reality the demon hidden behind it. Number 2. Jodi Arias. In June 2008, Mesa, Arizona, police discovered a scene that would dominate headlines for years. Travis Alexander, a 30-year-old salesman, was found dead in his own shower. His body bore 27 stab wounds, a slit throat, and a gunshot to the head. The woman at the center of it all was his ex-girlfriend, Jodi Arias, a woman whose quiet demeanor masked a storm of jealousy and obsession. Their relationship had begun in 2006 as a long-distance romance, passionate and intoxicating. But when Travis tried to move on, Arias refused to let go. She drove hundreds of miles, dyed her hair, and slipped into his home carrying both a camera and weapons. Hours before the slaying, the pair posed for intimate photographs. Images later recovered from a waterlogged camera tossed into a washing machine. They would become some of the most damning evidence in court.
Jodi Arias remains on suicide watch in this Arizona jail, waiting for a jury to decide as soon as this week if she lives or dies.
Originally, Arias denied the crime and repeatedly changed alibis, finally saying it was self-defense and that Travis had attacked her. However, her testimony, given so calmly, way too detailed, only made the prosecutor's allegations that much stronger concerning her manipulative qualities. Then, the jury disbelieved the story changes and found Arias guilty of first-degree slaying. Arias now lives a life with no possibility of being paroled. On the prison walls, her notoriety has a way of stirring different reactions among people. Some would think she is being manipulative and calculating, while others find it all morbidly fascinating. You've seen obsession turn deadly. Now brace yourself for something darkest. Number 1. Janine Jones. In the pediatric wards of San Antonio during the early 1980s, alarms rang with unnerving regularity. Babies who seemed stable suddenly slipped into seizures or cardiac arrest, almost always when nurse Janine Jones was on duty. Colleagues began to whisper about a chilling pattern, but the full scale of her crimes would take years to unravel. Jones, born in 1950, was outwardly devoted, projecting the image of a caregiver desperate to save children. In reality, she was manufacturing crises. By injecting infants with powerful substances like succinylcholine and heparin, she created emergencies only she could heroically respond to. For many, the intervention came too late. Investigators ultimately connected her with the merciful death of Chelsea McClellan, aged 15 months, by means of a deliberate overdose. While Jones was convicted in this instance, authorities believe that her total number of victims could be as high as 60, which would make her one of the country's most prolific child slayers ever. They sent her to prison under high security because even there, her name instilled fear. Crimes against kids are loathed among inmates. Thus, prison authorities found it necessary to keep her under maximum security. To correctional staff, she is not just a danger, but a picture of betrayal. A nurse who has manipulated trust and the vulnerability of innocent lives. Initially sentenced to 99 years, Jones was later given an additional number of years for the slayings of other infants. Today, she is a reminder of a chilling truth that the very profession which should save lives can also be a weapon of terror. Thanks for watching. If you found this story chilling, don't forget to hit that like button, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe so you never miss the next deep dive into true crime. And when you're done here, check out the next video waiting for you on the screen. It's one you won't want to miss.